Good evening, everyone. And you have to let me get used to my stuff up here. Also, those of you outside, you are not forgotten. I see you through the window. Good evening to you. I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that you're all here, that we're doing what we can to make it work. I will say that this is, it feels weird. Last week was a weird feeling for me because a lot of my personal Bible studies outside of the stuff that I do here, a lot of my personal stuff with other people are starting to ramp up. And so there's that, which I've kind of gotten out of a lot of the swing of those things. And then there was my class on Wednesday and my class on Sunday morning, and now this. So there's 3 lessons in a week with the Bible study stuff. And this is new. This is kind of a new setup. And so I would just ask a little bit of patience because it feels like a lot. It's not. It's just out of the routine of everything. But we've got some different stuff going on here. If you're joining us online, we've got a pretty new setup. Our songs are on the board behind us now. I think this is, at least for me, I know that you guys have been inside for a couple of rainy days, but this is only the second time that I've used it. So there's a lot of new changes happening all at once. And for a creature of habit like me, that's a lot. So be patient with me is what I'm asking for. I've got some stuff. We're going to talk about idolatry, and I can't tell you how long it's going to go. I've got several classes in mind, and I imagine that we'll be doing this for a little while. Adam asked me on Friday night, we were talking, and he said, "What's your outline looking like?" And it's kind of growing as we go. So I can't really just give you any sort of a schedule, but this is something that is personal to me. It's something that I've heard a million times. I've listened to people say this a million times, idols in your life and gods in your life. And, I'm always just kind of like, okay, God's in my life, got it. It seems like that almost always ends in a conversation of money. God's in my life, money, don't worship money, move on, got it. But for whatever reason, this time it's become personal. It's kind of how you have to communicate with me. Just keep saying it over and over and over again until I get it, because I will get it eventually. But here we are several years down the road, and this time the idea of false gods and idols has become personal to me. And so this study, like almost every study that I do, is for me. I'm studying it because it's something that's really impacting me hard. And so I hope that you find it helpful anyway in that way. We're going to treat it like a class. I've got questions. I would like your input. And just like always with a class, you don't have to wait until I click the question up on the board. If you've got something to say, just wave your hands and get my attention, and we'll be able to do that. In our last lesson on idolatry and false gods, we just introduced the concept of worshiping other gods and idols, and how other gods and idols really represent the same thing, worshiping something other than the one true creator, God of heaven and earth. In this lesson, I imagine that this lesson is not something that I have to do. I'm not probably going to teach you anything that you don't already know in this lesson. But I think if we're going to talk about idols, that it's at least important for us to start with this really important thing in the front of all of our minds, and that is this. We're all on the same page. God hates, all caps, bold, underline, hates other gods and sharing his throne with something else. That's really what the major theme of tonight is going to be as we talk about this. And so let's just start with some conversation. For those of you who are listening outside, or for those of you who are joining us online, if you have Ryan Awad's cell phone number, I would suggest if you have a comment, text Ryan. He's back there, and he can pass that along. Or if you know somebody is in here that can pass that along. I haven't quite worked out the kinks of how we're going to make this work for everybody, so let's figure it out together. But the first question that I want us to really talk about, what Bible commands or examples, anything in the Scripture can you think of that illustrates God's hatred of other gods and sharing His throne with other idols? Anything off the top of your head that you can think of to illustrate that God hates other gods? Yes, Andy, what do you got?
Well, the Ten Commandments.
I'm sorry?
The Ten Commandments. I mean, obviously, that's one of the first things.
Yes. And you know what? I might even say Sandy said the Ten Commandments, and she said it's one of the first things. And I might even say it is the first thing, really, because the first commandment is, I am the Lord your God. We're going to talk about this tonight. I love, when I ask the question, what are the things that you think of to illustrate this? I love that you said the same thing that I thought, because this is where we're going. So I'm not going to elaborate on this, but I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods besides me. You shall not make a graven image. And so the first three commandments really are me and me only, and just to make sure we're clear, nobody else, to illustrate that. Maria, did you have something that you were going to say?
I was just going to say, I mean, I think you don't see it as direct as the Ten Commandments, but I think you really see it from the very beginning in the Garden of Eden when God commands them not to eat from the one tree because, by Eve disobeying God, she was essentially putting her trust into something else other than God.
Yeah. And so Maria says in the Garden of Eden, Eve really tries to pursue something other than God, violates what God said not to do specifically. And do you remember specifically what the serpent said to Eve? If you do this thing, you can be like God. The motivation here is to, I don't know if her motivation was to replace God, but that's the practical reality of what's happening. I don't need God, I can be like Him. And so yes, from the very beginning of the Bible story in the Garden of Eden, Sandy, from the very beginning of the law of Moses in the Ten Commandments, anything else that you can think of? Yeah, Jay? Yes. We're going to spend some time in this class talking about what you're talking about right now and how the kings of Israel, think about Jeroboam the first and what Jeroboam the first did to set up the golden calves in Dan and Bethel so that the people would not go to Jerusalem. And then how many times, I don't even know the number, this is something that I should know. How many times with the kings of Israel, and by the way, not one single king of the north of Israel was a good king. And how many times throughout the record of this history do we read the words, they sinned after the manner of sin of Jeroboam. They didn't put away the gods. They didn't put away the high places. These are the things that lead people away from God, and ultimately God destroyed the people for it. Anything else? I'll give you the last word here before we move on. Yes, Sherry?
Well, the command not to marry people from other nations, just because He said if you do, your spouse will probably cause you to start worshiping your God.
That's right. Don't worship the gods of other nations. We're definitely going to hit that tonight. I don't know if we're going to cover all the material that I want to cover tonight, but that will probably be the last thing. So I'm not just moving past without comment. We're coming back to that. And not only to not worship the gods of the other nations, but in an extremely violent and what I would call extreme way, get rid of those gods. Don't have anything to do with the gods of the other nations. Look at Exodus chapter 12 and Numbers chapter 33 and verse 4. One of the things that I want to illustrate over and over again, and the one that I think is the easiest to do this, is with the plagues against Egypt when God was bringing the children of Israel out of slavery from Egypt. What we would call the 10 plagues, they weren't just 10 really cool things. Or I guess if you're an Egyptian, you wouldn't call them really cool. They weren't 10 really annoying things to annoy you into letting the people go. The 10 plagues specifically were direct attacks on the gods of the Egyptians. And you need to see this. You need to understand, well, of all the things that God could have done to make his case to let the Jewish people go, why did he overwhelm the Jewish people with frogs? Of all things, frogs. But there's a reason for that. In Exodus 12 and verse 12, I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. Do you notice those two things with these plagues? I am going to execute judgments against the gods of the Egyptians so that you will know those gods are not saving and powerful. I am the Lord. I am saving and powerful. And Numbers 33 and verse 4 mentions it also. On their gods also the Lord executed judgment. I've got this, it's from Google Maps. This is modern day Google Map, but I think that it's neat because it makes the point perfectly. This is a whole picture of the whole of Africa. Look up here at Egypt at the top. Look at that. Look at that giant desert covering the whole top part of Africa. You can tell on the map with the colors. It's just a big giant desert. Except for right here at the top of Egypt, you see the Nile River Delta. And look at all that green in the midst of the desert. That's life. That's why Egypt is a thing. Look at this. This is a satellite view of Egypt today. This is the giant desert around everything. And look at all this life. And it's the Nile River that runs through the desert that is essentially life to these people living in the wilderness. And so if you are an Egyptian, of course the Nile River and the lifeblood of your country, the life for your family that depends on the Nile, of course you're going to have gods that have to do with the Nile. And so Osiris is a god that you will be familiar with. He's the god of the underworld to the Egyptians. The Nile River is the vein through which Osiris's blood flows. There is Khnum, who is the guardian of the Nile River. There is Hapi, who is the spirit of the Nile River. And there's Nu, who is the god of life in the Nile. That's fish and other things that are going to be food for you. Look at Exodus chapter 7 and verse 24. I'm going to use a word that some of the young people taught me here. This is a word that's beyond my vocabulary. You have to move into the new generation to get words like this. The very first of the 10 plagues is God turning the water of the Nile River into blood. That's a God flex. God's flexing on all of these Nile River gods. Listen to it. Exodus chapter 7 and verse 24. And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink the water of the Nile. All of these gods that the Egyptians depend upon to give them life in the Nile. And God, through Moses, comes down and says, okay, I'm going to show you who's better than the gods of the Nile. I'm going to attack your Nile River. The second one is the plague of frogs, starting in Exodus chapter 8 and verse 1. Amun-Ra is the supreme creator of the Egyptian pantheon of gods. He is the sun god. He is the creator of all things. Amun-Ra's wife is Heket. And Heket is the mother of the god of birth, of giving life to the rest of the world. So that makes sense. If Amun-Ra is the supreme god and he created everything, Heket, his wife, is the goddess of birth and gives life to all things. Heket is portrayed as a frog. You can see a picture up there of her face. That's not a kindergartner who drew that picture, and it just looks really bad. It's a picture of this woman, female god, who's portrayed as a frog. And listen to this plague in Exodus chapter 8 and verses 13 and 14. The Lord did according to the word of Moses. The frogs, after the frogs just completely plagued everybody, this is the end of it, verse 13. The frogs died in the houses of the courtyards and the fields, and they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. So it's just like God's going down the list. Here are these gods that you depend on for life and for protection and for welfare and all of these things. And just one by one by one, God is going to specifically attack these other gods. And he's demonstrating in all of this that he is the one true supreme creator God of heaven and earth. Is there anything you want to add about that? That's just my illustration. The original question was, what passages in the Bible can you think of to illustrate God's hatred of other gods? And you can think of, Maria mentioned the beginning with replacing God. The Ten Commandments, we're going to talk about that next. This is just one example. We talk about the kings of Israel. Anything else that you can think of to show? I mean, the one that really sticks out in my head more than anything else, remember Manasseh, the worst king of Judah? Manasseh is the king who caused God to say, I'm done with Judah. And one of the things that it says about Manasseh, he took Asherah and brought this false god Asherah into the temple to be Yahweh's wife. And he sacrificed his own kids to Molech. And that's what caused God to say, I'm done with Jerusalem. No more. Are we all okay to say God hates other gods and idols? Are we okay to say that? Because I know that that's, well, God is a God of love and God doesn't hate. And I know that this is kind of extreme stuff, but can we be extreme in this regard and be on the same page? God hates other gods. He will not share his throne. Maria?
I think it's extreme because if you don't teach this side, this is an aspect of our Lord, is what we're talking about right here, regardless of what the world wants to claim as hatred or as ugliness or you're just being a negative person. God is God for all these,
Yeah.
reasons. And sorry, I get a little irritated. It's not towards you, but in this world, it's just, I don't think it hurts for us to remind each other that this is not hatred, this is not negativity, this is not God being evil.
You're right.
This is God being God, and this is why he's God.
That's like the statement. I hate when people, my friend Josh taught me this, he's like, I hate when people say, it is what it is. And he's like, what does that even mean? It isn't what it isn't. I don't know what that means. But your statement is profound. It's so simple and so profound. Of course God hates other gods because God is God. That's it. That's it. That's the bottom line. God is God. And it's not just so obvious that it's ridiculous. That is the fundamental base of all things. Look at Exodus chapter 20. I want to ask you another question here. In Exodus chapter 20, these are the 10 Commandments, and we already referred to them, but you can read them yourself, starting in verse 2. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Number 1. Number 2. I think number 2 is 2 parts. Part 1, you shall have no other gods before me. Part 2, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. The question that I would like to ask you is, I'm not very good at questions, and so you kind of probably have to read my mind a little bit on this one, but What relationship words or qualities or characteristics or behaviors is God demanding in these characteristics? What words would describe what God is asking from his people, not asking, demanding from his people when he says, I am the Lord your God, you will have no other gods before me? What words describe what God is shooting for here? What does he want from his people? Sandy, you got one? I see you pulling down your mask there.
Just like total commitment.
Yes, that's the first one on my list, commitment.
And the creator of the world, and I think that's why he hates the idols, because he knows what the idols will do to us. It will pull us away from him.
Yeah.
And, you know, and if you get so far gone, you know, there's no coming back.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, so I would tweak just a little bit. Sandy said total commitment, and God knows what the idols will do to us. They will pull us away from God, which I think is true, but let's assume that we can have God and the idol and not be pulled away from God. Still not okay. God doesn't want to share his relationship. Total commitment is what it is. Leslie, did you have one back there?
I just thought of loyalty.
I'm sorry?
Loyalty.
Can you tell me? Loyalty, yes, loyalty is a good one. I need some help. Ryan?
Luke wanted to say devotion or single-mindedness, kind of along the same lines.
Single-mindedness, good. Katie? Reverence towards God. This is Maria's. God is God. Reverence. To revere him as not, dear God, thank you for my food, but to say, capital G, God, that means you're the creator of all things. How can you but revere that?
Well, and just holding him in such a high place that he wouldn't even want to put an idol in front of him. Like this joyful submission that it's not even a thought that something could come in front of him.
Yeah. Yeah. Total commitment. 100% commitment. Loyalty. Jonathan, what did you have? Exclusivity. The one that I wrote down too is faithfulness. Listen to this. I thought, you know what? All of this talk about commitment, faithfulness, single-mindedness, it sounds an awful lot like marriage, doesn't it? So, what?
I was going to say the bride of Christ.
Yes, and God, how many times? Hosea, the church is the bride of Christ. How many times is God's relationship with his people explained through the marriage relationship? So I pulled my wedding vows because I don't have them memorized. I'm sorry about that. I maybe should. But I was shocked, totally shocked when I read my wedding vows. This is the first sentence, maybe two sentences of what I promised to Becky. Listen to how much what we promise to our spouse sounds like here. Remember, I am the Lord your God, no other gods, no other images, no other pretenders to be like me. Listen to what I promised to Becky. I, Ryan, choose you, Becky, above every other to be my wife. Think about that in terms of what God is asking for. Choose you above every other to be my wife, to laugh with, to live for, and to love. I will be faithful to you always and will strive every day to put you first. We understand it in this terms, don't we? What would you all think if you walked into a restaurant and you saw me sitting down at a dinner table on a date with another woman? What are you doing? Oh, I'm just on a date with somebody else. But what about Becky? And Becky walks in and she says, hey, how's it going? He's on a date with another woman. And Becky says, oh, I know, that's okay. He'll come back home to me. Everybody in here is shaking their head like that's... I mean, here's what is rolling around in the back of my mind. In the world that we live in, it's not completely off the table, which is gross. But in this room... and within our circle of people who both revere God and are decent human beings, I would like to think, it is completely unacceptable. What we expect from our spouse is total commitment, total faithfulness, single-mindedness, and it is not out of the realm of possibility or reason that God says the exact same thing. Look at the end. Exodus chapter 20 and verses 22 and 23. When God finishes the 10 Commandments, it's like he just says, here are the 10 Commandments, and then he moves on into other stuff about the law of Moses, and some of the first stuff that he says. Verse 22, the Lord said to Moses, thus you shall say to the people of Israel, you have seen for yourselves that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make gods of silver to be with me, nor shall you make for yourselves gods of gold. So here's the 10 Commandments. I am the Lord, no other gods, no images, don't take the Lord's name in vain, remember the Sabbath, honor your father and mother, don't kill people, don't cheat on your wife, don't steal. All of the 10 Commandments. And then we get to the end of the list and God says, no other gods. Like he really wants us to appreciate this thing that he's saying. I will not share my throne with anybody else or anything else. Anything you want to say about that, Mark?
I want to mention that Steve Shetlaw says it's impossible to have Jehovah and an idol. You will be pulled away because what you owe him is everything.
Yeah, it's impossible to have both, God and an idol, because you will be pulled away. Good. Okay, go to Deuteronomy chapter 4. There's one thing here. I can't tell you, I can't give you a definitive answer here on this. I would like some participation, and maybe you can help me out with this part. But just before we move on to the last thing that I want to talk about in this class, God says, I am the Lord your God. He says, no other gods. And he says, no carved images. Besides the duh, I want to ask, why does God say this? What is God's criticism with the carved images? And the duh is, well, because that's what everybody in the world around this Jewish people did. It's what the Egyptians did. It's what the people in the land where they were going did. They had these carved images. And so God is saying, hey, everybody else in the world around you does this thing, and so you don't do what everybody else is doing. And yes, I think that that's a part of it. But I would like to ask, why no carved images? Did you have something, Jonathan? What is it?
Well, it's just off the top of my head, but that's sort of the way you elevate people. You make statues out of them, put them on coins. I know the Jewish people had a problem with there being coins with Caesar's head on it, and it's like, well, there's no carved images. You shouldn't have carved images. Well, with Caesar, I don't mean an idol per se, but I know that was a problem.
Yeah.
That's what we call it.
So portraying God, maybe? Jonathan's comment is the Jewish people even had a problem in the first century with having coins with Caesar's head. And it's not just a coin. Caesar did eventually portray himself as God or as a God. But why? Why is that such a problem?
Do you think it also
Yeah, Maria?
has to do with the fact that, I mean, God is a spirit. I mean, he's the ultimate spirit, but I mean, you know, he has aside from sending Jesus, and that was for every single person that ever, you know, was on this earth would have an opportunity to see.
Yeah. So God is a spirit. Don't portray me as some physical thing. Maybe let's read this. Deuteronomy 4, let's start in verse 9. Deuteronomy 4, I'm going to skip around here just a little bit, but I'm going to start in verses 9 through 12. Only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children, how on the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, that's Mount Sinai, the Lord said to me, gather the people to me that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, that they may teach their children to do so. And you came near and you stood at the foot of the mountain while the mountain burned with fire and the heart of the heaven wrapped with darkness, cloud and gloom. Now that's something. This is what happened. When you came to Mount Sinai, this is what you saw. You saw the mountain burning with fire, the heart of heaven, wrapped in darkness, cloud, and gloom. In verse 12, and the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but saw no form. There was only a voice. Pay attention to that, because that's going to keep coming up again and again. When you were standing at Mount Sinai getting the commands from God, you did not see the form of anything. You only heard a voice. Look at verses 15 through 19. Therefore, watch yourselves very carefully, since you saw no form on the day that the Lord spoke to you out of Horeb, out of the midst of the fire. Beware lest you act corruptly by making carved images for yourselves in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female. Pay attention to that. 15 and 16. You saw no form at Sinai. Don't make anything in the form of anything. 17, in the likeness of animal that's on earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in water under the earth. And beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of heaven, you be drawn away. And there it is, Steve Shetlaw's comment. Raise your eyes to heaven and be drawn away. We'll talk more about that next week. And you bow down and you serve them things that the Lord your God has allotted to all the peoples of the whole heaven. Look at verse 23 through 29. Take care lest you forget the covenant of the Lord your God, which he made with you, and make a carved image, the form of anything that the Lord your God has forbidden you. For the Lord your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. When you father children, children's children, and have grown old in the land, if you act corruptly by making a carved image in the form of anything, and by doing what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, so as to provoke him to anger, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that you will soon utterly perish from the land that you're going over the Jordan to possess. You will not live long in it, but you will be utterly destroyed. And the Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you'll be left few in number among the nations where the Lord will drive you. And there you will serve gods of wood and stone and the work of human hands that neither see nor hear nor eat nor smell. Now look at this. Re-engage. Verse 29. But from there, when you're in these foreign lands, because you've rejected God and you're worshiping their gods of wood and stone and metal and all of this stuff. Verse 29. From there, you will seek the Lord your God and you will find him if you search after him with all your heart and with all your soul. So is there anything in this chapter that teaches us about why God doesn't want carved images? Maria?
I mean, after reading all of that and thinking about it, I mean, it's kind of, and this isn't to sound ugly, but it's kind of a ridiculous thought on humans to think that they could create something, whether it's carving out wood or whatever, but that they could create something material
Yeah.
or even anything.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, right?
Because God is the creator, and what are you going to say? Well, that beautiful rose, that's God? No, God created that. That's just one very small part.
Yeah.
The mountainside, the ability for doctors to save children's lives because he gifted them, so is that God? I mean, you see what I'm saying? Whereas, like, if I want to use my niece as an example and create something to represent her, like a painting, well, you know, I can sit there and have someone who's talented, paint her up, you know, and I mean, it's just when you really go through all this and you really think about it, what are you going to use if there's nothing out there?
Yeah. We're back to your comment. God is God. He is the creator of all things. And what are you going to do? Are you going to bow down and worship him with something that he created? He created all things. Are you going to take something that he created and then worship that thing as if it's God or in the place of God? He created that thing. It's ridiculous. You said that a couple times, and that really is a bottom line, Mark.
remember the reference about the site, but it says, in the Bible says, with a piece of wood you carve an idol and worship it, with the other part of that piece of wood you throw it in the fire to use.
Yeah.
Well, how does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what you're looking at, and we'll spend some time here, is Isaiah, I think it's 44, 45, and 46, I think. With this same piece of wood, you chop down the wood and you make a fire to keep yourself warm, and you carve an idol with the other side and you worship it as God. It's ridiculous. And also, I think it's Jeremiah 10, I think is another place. And we will spend some time on that one, Mark. And so here's something just to think about. God is not like anything that can be imagined. I would encourage you to read Psalm 115 that describes this same thing. But look at verse 29 especially. This one really struck me in thinking about this. Not only is any created thing that we make going to fall desperately short of who God is and what God is, but beyond even that, in verse 29, from there you will stop seeking after God through all of these created, silly, ridiculous things. In verse 29, seek the Lord your God and you will find him if you search after him with all your heart and with all your soul. I wonder, and I don't know, this is just me thinking out loud. I wonder if God doesn't want some external form of bowing down to a created thing. What he wants is my heart and my soul. And even though my heart within me is a physical, tangible thing, he wants me entirely. He wants my love and my service, not my outward physical action. He wants an intangible thing. I don't know if that's really the answer to this, but he said no created thing. That's good enough. Maybe we can go a little further. There's one last thing that I want to do today, and we're coming to the end of our time, and so we won't do all of this, all of these passages. If you're still close, let's see. Since we're in Deuteronomy 4, let's just go over to Deuteronomy 7. That's the closest one. We'll just do one for now. There's Exodus 23, Exodus 34, Deuteronomy 12. We'll read Deuteronomy 7, verses 1 through 5. And the question attached to this passage is, do you think that these instructions are extreme? Because, yeah, I know. You shake your head no, right? No, of course they're not extreme. What do you got to say?
Matthew 6:24 says, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon."
You can't serve two masters. You can't have divided loyalties, period. But even still, let me be the devil's advocate. I mean, in this case, literally the devil and his advocate on this one. Deuteronomy 7 in verses 1 through 5, the question is, do you think that this is extreme? When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, 7 nations more numerous and mightier than yourselves. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, you must devote them to complete destruction. That's worth underlining or highlighting in your Bible, because that's the heading for everything that's coming next. Devote them to complete destruction. You shall make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them. You shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons, taking their daughters for your sons. Why? Why no intermarriages, divided loyalties? He says in verse 4, "For they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods, and the anger of the Lord would be kindled against you and would destroy you quickly. Thus you shall deal with them. Break down their altars, dash in pieces their pillars, chop down their Asherim, and burn their carved images with fire." The title of this lesson tonight is God hates, all caps, bold and underlined, hates other gods. And what he wants from his people, what he wants from us in all things, is the complete and utter destruction of all competing forces for Him in our lives. And so I'll leave you with this. Like I said, tonight was not intended to be a super practical thing about the gods and the idols that we worship. Tonight was intended just to put an exclamation mark on what you already know. God will not share His throne. And so the thing that I would leave you with as we move into this week and as we get ready to come back next week and talk some more about some practical things that we might see with this, is God sharing His throne with any competing forces in your life? I'd like for you to start thinking about that. What divides your loyalty? What causes you to say, I could serve God, or I could serve this? I could worship God, or I could do this instead. What is the thing that, I'm back to Steve's comment, or to Jessica's comment about you can't serve two masters. And the passage that we read just a few minutes ago in Deuteronomy chapter 4, when you look up at the other gods and they draw you away. It's like a bug chasing after the light. What's the thing? My eyes are fixed on Jesus. What's the thing that draws you away to go looking and searching after other things? And so that's two lessons I know that were an introduction, a super long introduction, but I want to spend some more time talking about this. Is there anything else that you want to say? Lisa, you can have the last word on this conversation about God hating other gods.
Well, for a couple of years now, I've been trying to think, I'm getting older and how can I grow more in the Lord, blah, 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 But I mean that very genuinely and seriously. And one of the things, and how can I not allow age to block, to deceive myself to think that, well, I'm older, I don't have the energy. Or sometimes I leave Jenny's house, go home and just fall asleep sitting straight up on the couch. But, I have learned more than ever in my life how much I deceive myself. And I think, and only because I'm really pursuing this and trying to figure out, in my final chapter on this earth with my great God who's done so much for me.
Yeah. Well, No, go ahead. I cut you off. Sorry.
No, I was just thinking that, it is so crazy frightening how it doesn't matter what age you're at or where you're at, you always have to be examining yourselves daily. He needs to test us and try us constantly. And it's just so easy for me to trick fate, deceive myself about, well, I just can't fit that into this hour or this day.
Mm-hmm.
And really, in reality, it comes down to Lisa deceiving Lisa. And that's not a very pretty thing to think about or hear or, but as you talk tonight, it has nothing, to me, it has nothing to do with idols, because I've got to start, I'm not even going to think about an idol unless I'm doing what I'm talking about. That's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't allow anything in my path, you know what I mean?
Right. What you're saying is the practical function of this class. And one of the things that we get to do as Christians every first day of the week with the Lord's Supper, to examine ourselves. And what I'm asking from you in this class is Lisa's comment. Please would you dig deep and look into your heart and genuinely examine yourself. This has been a class time, but still I'm going to offer an invitation. The invitation to Christianity is, if you're here tonight and you are ready to commit yourself, your life, wholly to God through Jesus. That's really what it's all about. to take all of the competing forces and idols and other gods that may pop up in your life and to say, no more. No more are those things going to sit on the throne of my life and control me and rule me. I'm going to serve Jesus from now on. If you want to do that, come forward as we sing the song of invitation.